The town is an important aspect of Darkest Dungeon. We will be excluding the districts since they are not in the base game and are often geared towards late game anyways. Two general rules of thumb: the way I look at the importance of the town is the immediate dungeon impact, and I tend to increase everything at the same rate. There are only two buildings I do not increase at the same rate, and I will bring those up when I get there. As I say in my early game guide, the Stagecoach is the first stop for upgrading. Getting heroes in and allowing a larger roster is important to the success of your dungeon runs. More heroes and more variety of heroes will allow a higher chance of a better party composition. Better armor and skills cannot always save you from bad team composition, and often I find it the other way around. Depending on your experience, how new your run is, and preference, this may decide whether you do more weekly heroes than people on your roster. I personally increase roster size over people coming in on a weekly basis. This was my third playthrough, so I knew how to manage stress better and not lose individuals as quickly. Therefore, my turnout rate of individuals was not nearly as high as my first round should have been, and how much I recommend it being if you are first new to the game. Getting up to the next level of Stagecoach Network would allow 4 heroes per week, therefore you can keep turning over heroes and increase the ones that you have in your town, such as removing negative quirks or getting them better skills and weapons before they go back out. Grabbing experienced recruits is always beneficial, and I recommend doing that immediately because it will save you a lot of time later via the skills they come with are already maxed, and same with the armor for the level they come in. This saves you a lot of money and a lot of time. They do often come with a decent amount of negative quirks, but if you get them before they lock in, these aren't too expensive to remove. The next building I go to is the Guild. The Guild is the largest power spike early on in the game. Certain DOT effects are never going to be raw damage heavy, and the accuracy is not dependent on weapon. It's dependent on the skills. Therefore, the better skills you get, the more DOT damage you can do. Sometimes the more raw damage you can do, because certain abilities will allow you to hit beasts harder, or they give you a higher critical chance, and therefore, the more accuracy and the more critical, you're going to have a better time hitting and doing actual damage. Also, stuns are not based on weapons or armor, and they're skill attached. Therefore, if you want reliable stuns, you're going to have to get skills over the weapons. Skills are also cheaper if you're buying them in only like 1 or 2. I would almost never recommend buying all 7 early on in the early game, or even in the late game. They're very expensive, and often you're only going to use about 2 to 3 skills on a hero. I would recommend getting those first and then maybe going back in the later game. Buying all the skills, as I said, is a luxury and should not be a practice you keep in the early game. The next building is the Blacksmith. The Blacksmith is the next important one, since this helps our people do more damage if they're a raw damage dealer, and also help to keep them alive via HP and dodge. This is also where they get their base speed, which is important for beating monsters on a consistent basis. Deciding which one to upgrade first can be tough. You have to take into account the party you have. If you think your heroes need to tank up more, obviously put one into the armor first, or if you think you just want to get the damage out, get through the enemies, one-shot them in those earlier levels, definitely go for the weapon. This is really up to you. I often find myself gravitating more towards the weapon because, as I said, getting to that one-shot territory, if the enemy's dead before they get to go, you don't have to worry about getting hit, is the way I approached it. I'm not saying that is right or wrong, I'm just saying that's how I approach it. Just keep in mind you may not be able to do the furnace because these all take deeds, and so does the Stagecoach, and the Stagecoach is going to take first priority, which means your furnace and all that stuff is going to take a lower priority. But it's still very important to get up once your Stagecoach is at an appropriate level. It might be surprising that the Sanitarium is becoming before the Abbey and the Tavern, but I'll explain why. You're not going to do that many stress heals early on in the game because you're often turning over heroes at a pretty high rate, and the Sanitarium looks more for the end game or mid game than it really does the early game. Eventually, you'll want to start saving heroes, which means you're going to get rid of quirks and diseases. I tend to evenly upgrade between diseases and quirks. However, quirks is the first one to get a bonus, and then it is also the first one to finish, because you don't get diseases as quickly as you do quirks, and also multiple diseases can be removed unlike quirks, so therefore you can have a smaller amount of disease facilities than you can quirk facilities. So the patient cells, I try to get more in quirks and also try to reduce the quirk cost. Also, removing quirks that affect your dungeon run experience should be removed first, and other things such as maybe like Gambler or God-fearing can be left alone because those are really only stress heal related. I don't want to tell you which one to do first, but I'll give you the ones that I usually do. I usually do the Tavern just because the portraits aren't going out as fast as the busts are, because I'm putting a lot of the busts into the Sanitarium, and the guild doesn't get upgraded as quickly as the Sanitarium in my opinion. Therefore, I often have leftover portraits that I stick into the Tavern, and usually I do the bar because that's the cheapest stress heals, and also it's not an excess of stress heals, and tends to save you money in the long run. You can do either, because if you're prioritizing busts or if you're prioritizing portraits, you should really go with the facility that works for you. Also, you may have to look at your quirks and say, well, I have a lot of people with love interest and, like gamblers, so I really shouldn't be investing in the Abbey because they can only go to the Tavern. So those are things you're going to have to look forward to if you're upgrading both buildings. I personally do the Tavern, but that doesn't mean it's better than the Abbey. It's just where I usually have leftover portraits from and can really help me out there. Now we get to the not so great buildings, which is the Survivalist. The Survivalist just decreases the cost of campfire abilities, and your heroes are always going to come with a couple of campfire abilities already pre-selected. If you think they're absolutely worthless, the ones you got, just suck it up and maybe buy one on 1 or 2 heroes, but make sure you take those heroes in the medium dungeon runs then, because if you go in a short one, the Survivalist doesn't even matter because you're not going to use a campfire ability. The Survivalist is probably one of the few buildings I literally do right at the end game once everything else has their crest, because it's just not that important. The Nomad is probably more useless than the Survivalist. Personally has never used the Nomad for anything great. I may have bought a trinket once or twice before from them, because as you go into later game, there can be a trinket or 2 that may be beneficial to you now, and if you have the goal to use it, it does save you a possible dungeon run. However, in the early to mid game, and even like maybe the beginning of the late game, I just don't see the Nomad being that good. Things are rather expensive in there, and that's even with you having the building upgraded. Common items in there can cost up to 2,500 gold, and often the common items I see in there I pick up all the time and I just sell away because I don't need them. The only way I think I could ever see the Nomad being an increase in priority, and it's not even possible, but if they would go back through and add like a 3rd slot down there that says like, trade increase or something, or sale price increase, whatever have you. But when you sell a trinket, it got like 10% more or even 5% more gold. I would definitely prioritize that, because at that point I sell a lot of trinkets, and anything to help me increase my money inflow would be beneficial. My concluding thoughts on this is, try to spread out the love so everything is around the same. Since if you make one thing too high or one building too high, you're probably not going to be able to really utilize all of its effects. Such as, the skills and armor aren't going to be able to be used by Resolve level 3 or 4 if you have them maxed. They're going to have to wait until they hit that Resolve level. What's the point of wasting all your crests, all your portraits, all your deeds on a building that you're not going to be able to use foreseeably within the next maybe 20 weeks? However long it's going to take you to get all those individuals to level 4 and 5 to actually utilize the building to upgrade it. If your buildings go too far ahead and other ones lag behind, you have this weird world where your heroes might hit really hard, have really good skills, but then you can't stress heal them. Or they're going to have a lot of bad quirks on them because you can't afford to take off the quirks because the Sanitarium's so far behind where you only have 1 slot in the Sanitarium and you can only remove 1 bad quirk per week. It's really not beneficial. Everything should rise at the same rate, except for, as I said before, the Survivalist and the Nomad, because their buildings are just not worth it. They do not have a lot of immediate dungeon impact, because you can do short dungeons and negate campfire abilities, which is why I say the Survivalist does not have a strong dungeon impact. The other quick thing is the Tabby or the Tavern may lag behind depending on which one you focus on and which of the busts or portraits you get more of or prioritize throughout your dungeon runs. Let me know how you built your town before. This is how I did, because I've had great success with this in my past 2 runs. However, this does not mean this is the only way to do it, and you might have a fresh take on this. Thanks for watching. I hope this helps you if you're just starting out. I will be doing a video about my thoughts on the districts in another video. I almost have all of them, and once I go through one game completely, I'll go back through, look at the ones I first upgraded, and then the ones I last got, and put my 2 cents on that. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe below.